I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender. Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I was so excited to talk to Bobby Hundreds. If you don't know who he is, he started the hundreds.com, which is, I would say, is one of the, he might disagree, but I would say it's one of the premier and longest lasting streetwear brands out there. It's been around for 17 years, came out of the whole skateboarding, surfing, punk subculture in California in the OOs. He grew up in the 80s and 90s, started this company in 2003. He wrote a book, This Is Not a T-Shirt, which is about the subculture, how to start a clothing line that's based on such an intense subculture, how to build a community around it, how to build a brand around it. And so many of the principles that he discusses in the book and then on this podcast apply to everything in business. It's so important. The principles of why a subculture flourishes and is attractive to so many young people and even adults, those principles are the same things that make people loyal to a brand or a company or make a product exciting to have. But listen to this podcast and see what a true artist has to say about business, subcultures, fashion, and what's happening next. What have you been up to today?
Mondays are just, I've never had, I don't know, everyone calls it something different. Sunday scaries, Monday blues or whatever. I've never had it before. I've always been super excited to go to work every Monday morning. Like Sunday, it's basically starting from Saturday on. I'm like, can't wait to get back to work on Monday. And just throughout the course of the pandemic, I've been developing Sunday blues or Sunday scaries. It's just Mondays are really hard for me. And I don't know if it's because I'm spending much more time with my family and at home than I ever have in my life, which at the...
That you make it sound, it could be either a bad thing or a good thing based on how you just said it.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe it's both, right? Like that's something else that I've been considering more throughout this year is things are just generally both. Like it's amazing hanging out with my wife and kids this much, but it's also at times paralyzing, like it's just so much.
Well, you've spent your whole adult life building up this brand, and I'll introduce you in a second, but I like just chatting for a while.
Yeah.
This is what your whole focus has been. You probably, the world's turned a little sideways, and not only that, the world is depressed. And since you're always trying to pick up on themes and trends and what's going on with your community, they're depressed and they lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And they don't know what the future is going to look like.
Yeah, that's a very real thing. I mean, and I feel the same way, right? I'm very fortunate that I have a job right now, but who's to say that this job exists within a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, you know? Especially fashion has always been such a finicky, unpredictable marketplace. And then you add this thing to it, it's just, you know, we don't have cash reserves to last us a year. You know, like we're just not equipped. We're a small business. We're not equipped like that. We pretty much live month to month in a lot of ways. And so also when you're looking at the way that fashion and clothing is set up, you know, especially if you're omni-channel, you sell direct through your online store, through your flagship stores, which we do have, or you sell wholesale, right? Or you do both, which is what we do. But half of our business just shut out overnight because all the stores closed around the world. And so we couldn't sell to anyone else. We only had to pump through our channels and had to pivot really quickly to becoming just a direct brand, which is a science in itself.
So a couple questions there. Just out of curiosity, I'm assuming online sales went up. Was that enough to counter?
Yeah, we're almost there. Shockingly, you know, the online reception for the brand has just been through the roof. And so we are not where we were a year ago in terms of an overall business, but we're closing that gap. You know, the online has really, really come through.
And was there any other way you were able to pivot? Like, for instance, you could have made, you know, the 100 surgical masks.
Well, we made masks in the beginning. I wasn't actually really that interested in making them, but there was such a demand for masks from our audience who were used to, you know, just surgical masks or boring masks from the store. And they were saying, hey, this is somewhat of a fashion accessory as well. And so much of my industry, streetwear, is driven by the Asian marketplace. And the Asian brands, streetwear brands, have been making masks, like cool looking masks, for years because they've lived through SARS and they've dealt with all of this before. And so it's really normal to already see that happening. There were trends 5-6 years ago within like cool premium streetwear brands making cool masks to wear. And so we were already ahead of the pack in that sense. And that's very normal for our customer. But now it's catching up. Yeah.
Your stuff's so colorful compared to like just wearing some like light blue surgical mask. Like I was just thinking, like, why didn't I order some masks from you guys? Like that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
But let me just say, I'm talking to Bobby Hundreds, aka Bobby Kim, and you started with your partner Ben. You started the Hundreds, which over the past 20 years has been a consistently popular and growing. I don't know. I don't even like using the word streetwear brand. You basically have built like clothing and design and art or artistic clothing around kind of the subculture you grew up in, the skateboarding, surf skate subculture, hardcore punk type of subculture you grew up in. And there's a community around streetwear. Like I feel like between streetwear, clothes, music, exporty type stuff like skateboarding, surfing, there's like a culture and a philosophy. And I'm kind of, I'll let you talk in a second, but I'm kind of jealous in a good way. It must feel so good to grow up in a subculture and then create a company around just the philosophy and art and design of that and community of that subculture. I think it's a really great thing.
Yeah, I have the best job in the world. I was just talking about this weekend with somebody because we'll get to it later, but I wrote a book, but I'm also in the process of writing my next book, which is a young adult fiction novel. And it's all set around a teenager as a protagonist. And someone was asking me, my friend was asking me, why are you writing from that perspective? And I was like, in many ways, I stopped growing at that age. You know, I'm cemented at the age of 13. The music I listen to, I still dress like I'm 13 years old. You know, I'm still making a lot of the choices I was making when I was 13. And that was such a critical time in my life and many people's lives. And so the fact that everything that I loved and was enamored with during that window of my existence, that I get to dwell in it forever and share it with my audience, educate and inform them on a lot of these cool things that I was into back then and getting them up to speed with it. And then also just like being cognizant of what younger people are into now. Just I'm more emotionally on their level than I am someone who's my age, So it's awesome. Like I'm like Peter Pan. I never grew up. I get to work in this space every day and get to make money, talking about Garfield or talking about skateboarding and like working with skate companies or sneaker companies like Nike or a Puma or Adidas, like just working within that world.
I think also that's the idea of subculture is so interesting. Like everybody, when they kind of graduate youth, they get the corporate job because they want, they got to pay for the mortgage and the family and the responsibilities. And it's such a pleasure. They kind of leave their subcultures, or subcultures are just things for the weekend. Like, oh, I'm going to make a microbrewery on the weekend, or I'm going to go fishing on the weekend, or watch, play in my fantasy sports league on the weekend. But I always think there's some subcultures that it's almost like there's a code to them. There's like a set of values that go along with them. And by the way, you mentioned your book. The book's called "This Is Not a T-Shirt," which is basically about this, how it's more than just streetwear. It's a brand, it's a culture, it's a community. And you talk about essentially it's a memoir, and most of it is the development of you growing up in this culture and then building this incredible fashion business in it and the ups and downs of that, because it's never easy. People think there's like a hump where you get over that and suddenly like everything's easy with business, but that is just never true. It is never, ever, ever true. The problems get worse, actually.
Everything gets harder. You work twice as hard for half the money, is what I say. It's funny.
That could be.
Yeah. When we were starting, we started this brand in our early 20s, and I think my partner, Ben, and I, who I own this business with, we used to tell ourselves we have to grind it out now. Like we're going to work hard now in our 20s so that we can build our company, the infrastructure. We can have a staff who can, take over the hard work. And by the time we're in our 40s and 50s, we're going to be just cruising on a yacht and just enjoying kind of like the fruit of the land. And if someone could have gone back and told me, actually, with more staff, there's more administrative duties, there's more headaches, more things can go wrong, you're making more product, there's just more chance for error everywhere, and then there's just greater responsibility. You have a wider stage, and so there's more expectation of you.
Do you even want to go on a yacht?
No, I don't. That's the irony too, is that the promise of we can sell this company for hundreds of millions of dollars one day. That's what drives a lot of young brands and young entrepreneurs and upstarts. But for somebody like me, if you handed me $200 million or $100 million, $50 million to leave this company today, that'd be really nice, just psychologically, knowing I have a safety net somewhere. But I'd be right back here in this office, I'd probably take a vacation for a week, but I'd be right back in here, and my yacht would be parked wherever it is in some harbor somewhere, and I would still be doing exactly what I do every day. So the promise of wealth or this goal, it doesn't really resonate much with me. It's not really what drives me to do this every day.
It reminds me, I did a podcast once with Peter Thiel, who was the first investor in Facebook. And he was telling me how at one point early on, Facebook had an offer from, I think, Microsoft for $1 billion. And Zuckerberg was 24 years old, and he would have made $250 million. And everybody wanted him to take it because who knows, Friendster, MySpace, all these things had disappeared. Maybe Facebook would. And here's, they all wanted to take their money off the table. And at the board meeting, Mark was like, no, I don't want to sell. Even though he was imagine being 24 and being offered $250 million. And he said, like, look, what am I going to do with $250 million? I'm just going to want to start a social network and make it popular. And I already did that. I'm already doing that right now.
Yeah.
So it's a good insight. And again, that's part of the envy here, is that I don't think I've ever been involved in a startup where I felt that way, where I was like, okay, I could do this until I'm 90 years old and not want to do anything else. And I think it's because it's not just like you love doing it. This is your culture. You've contributed to the culture you grew up loving, which let's maybe start with that. Like, what is, or how, I have my thoughts on this, but you describe it well in the book, and I'm just fascinated by this sort of stuff. How would you describe the combination between skate culture, punk? Because clothing, I think, sort of grew into these cultures in the 90s as a commercial thing. Like in the early 80s, there wasn't like, there might have been punk brands and punk clothes, but it wasn't like as commercial as it became in the 90s and 00s.
Right.
And I don't say that's a bad or a good thing. It's an interesting thing.
Right. And again, it's one of those things that it's both. I think it's good and in many ways bad as well. Same. I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1980. And so the subcultures that I was immersed in, which was skateboarding, hardcore, the backpack rap scene of the 90s, rave in the 90s, there were brands that were eventually associated with them, but there wasn't necessarily an industry, or at least a viable industry structured around any of it. They were largely art projects, which is how we still looked at it all. Because growing up, again, like 80s, off the tail of the 70s, where a lot of this subculture dress was more about tribal identifiers. You were just really trying to associate with particular communities or distinguishing yourself from somebody that you weren't, othering someone else. And so people weren't really looking at it like, I'm going to make $1 million designing clothing that looks like this or is borrowing from it. There was so much credibility hewed into like literally figuratively the fabric. You had to be a part of the scene. You had to contribute. You had to have been you had to have paid your debts, and toiled in the scene in order to dress a certain way. And so in the 90s, that was a really big thing, was, you couldn't carry a skateboard if you didn't know how to do a kickflip, if you didn't skate. You couldn't wear a certain brand. You couldn't wear skate shoes. If you're going to wear a band t-shirt, you had to have listened to the band. You had to love the band. And so there's so much code associated with it. And we, meaning myself and a lot of my peers in this industry, we grew up knowing and understanding a lot of that language. And then when we developed our brands, we still kind of carried a lot of that same philosophy in terms of what streetwear was about. Like, you need to be responsible to the culture. You need to be caught up on the history. You have to respect. There's so much respect and knowledge built into what we were doing. You couldn't just wear a brand. You had to know everything about the brand. And now in 2020, look, it's almost 20 years later that we started this company, and our generation of streetwear began. And a lot of that code and language is lost. A lot of that respect is lost. It has become largely more about how expensive your clothes are, what the price ticket is, how much it resells for, and celebrity attachments, celebrity endorsements, which was also pretty much the opposite of most subculture movements when we were starting.
Right, because I kind of think from hardcore culture, skate culture, and so on. Initially, it was about we're breaking our elbows and knees and got the clothes to show for it and got the skateboards to show for it. And also there's a certain skepticism towards authority, right? So not in the kind of Hollywood version of what punk is, but I feel like, look at skateboarding in California in the early 90s. Wasn't it illegal for a while because everybody was concerned kids were going to get hurt. Yeah. So there was always this tension between being an adult and being a kid who wants to do tricks on the skateboard. Yeah. And similar with punk, I feel it there was a natural rebellion to rock, and then almost like an angry rebellion to metal, and then kind of this. Then I don't know, how would you describe the transition from metal to punk, or maybe there was a different transition. Maybe it was rock to punk. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a much more complicated conversation, but I think it all comes back to deconstruction, kind of questioning why certain systems or structures set up the way that they are. And if you're looking at rock and roll at that time in America, and it becoming more of a mainstream platform a type of music that even your parents could enjoy and appreciate, that was playing on the radio, that was playing, on primetime television, then punk is going to move in and question everything about it, and resist it and go against. And that's why even I grew up in a straight edge hardcore scene, which was, hardcore going against punk, and then straight edge working within that. And then it starts breaking just into lifestyle habits and patterns of, if punks are going to dress this way and smoke and do drugs and drink, then we're going to do the opposite of that, and constantly opposing. I think that it's just a very young, I don't know, I've always admired it, just the way that youth culture works and just the youth perspective. And I think it comes from, at that age, you're separating yourself from your parents, your families, and you're trying to identify who you are, and that comes down to the music you listen to, the food you eat. I was a vegan when I was 14 years old, like in the mid 90s, like saying I'm not gonna, I grew up in a Korean household and I'm telling my parents I'm vegan, which at that time people didn't even really understand vegetarianism, and then I was a vegan. So, just being completely anti everything and saying, I'm gonna wipe the slate clean, everything you taught me and everything you're saying is wrong, from my parents to my teachers to the government to society, and I wanna do it my way. And that's what makes the world turn, is young people thinking like that, for better or for worse,
So I wonder if now, and I don't mean to say, I always hate it when I say, oh, kids now, they don't get the blah, 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 because I'm sure they have their own forms of rebellion, but it does seem like it doesn't come out in terms of the music or the clothes right now, the way their own rebellion is. Maybe it comes out a little bit more politically, I don't know. But again, in just the way you described it, there's always this feeling of against. You're going to be skateboarding against. You're going to be listening to the music against. And in general, and you described this, I forget it was in the book or one of your blogs, that there was always this skepticism towards everything. And that's part of the culture. And I think that's part of being an artist as well. So you start off as an artist who makes clothes in this culture. I think artists have to walk into a room and they're the ones who see what's different in the room. Everyone else says oh, this looks great, this room. The artist who walks in and says, this is the one thing that looks different in this room, and is able to notice that through society to make their art. Yeah. This is just me riffing on art. I don't know, but
no, totally. I do touch a little bit about on that in the book as well, is that as an artist, I've always been drawn, just the way that I'm hardwired, I'm always drawn to leveling out an imperfection, right? Like if there's a wrinkle, I want to flatten it. If it's a flat piece of fabric, I want to wrinkle it. To me, the world is never good enough, right? That's why we are exhausting people to be around, because we always have something that we'd like to fix. Like I'm drinking out of my Nalgene bottle, and as I'm doing it, I'm like, why is it so hard to drink out of this spout? Why can't we design this better? And then I'll go and then I'll try to fix that, right? So we're constantly nitpicking at the world. I watch a movie and I'm like, I wish I'd gone this way. And then I'll go just make the movie myself the way I want to make it. Right? It's this egocentric, narcissistic point of view where no one can do it as good as you can do it. Like you see all the problems with it, you know how to fix it. And that goes from art and goes into my work. It also goes into just the way that I look at social issues, politics, activism, all of that, right? And so if everyone is moving in one direction, so the book is called This Is Not a T-shirt. It's basically a parody of a old Fugazi fake merchandise shirt that said, this is not a Fugazi t-shirt. And Fugazi was, in its earlier iteration, you can say was Minor Threat. And Minor Threat had a cover of sheep, right? And there's all these white sheep going one direction and a black sheep going in the other direction. And that's pretty much how I've, framed my entire life. If everyone is moving in one direction, it must be wrong. No matter how accurate or truthful it is, it must be wrong, or at least I must question and challenge it, which is, I think, James, why I'm so drawn to you all the time, because you will look at things in that sense. If everyone is talking about the pandemic in this sense, you're going to take a completely different approach. And I always want to know what that other approach is.
Yeah, and I think it's not for the sake of being contrary, but to actually just have an open mind. There's always 360 degrees of looking at things. And I should mention too, your one clever thing with your book, this is not a T-shirt, is that you have the J.D. Salinger cover design and font and everything for 9 stories, which kind of like the next generation of that rebellious spirit that he kind of rode that wave in the 50s.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting also about Straight Edge and Minor Threat, because Ian MacKaye, when he was with Minor Threat, wrote that song Straight Edge, which he totally now says, and he's viewing this philosophically too, like, okay, if everybody started doing Straight Edge, even though I wrote the song, I'm not associating myself with Straight Edge. So, and then there was Bent Edge, right, which was against Straight Edge. So it always keeps on going. And I wonder though, well, we'll get to this, but clothes at some point have gone from, first they went from things just people wear. Then they kind of, I feel like with people like Mark Echo at Complex, Damon John, Fubu, all the people you mentioned in your book on the California side, that everything started to get more commercial, which is fine because kids wanted to identify with these philosophies around the country. So they, everybody benefited. And then now it's sort of morphed into more of this, my daughter, everybody's just trading on StockX, their Supreme clothes and Supreme knockoffs and this and that.
I love that your daughter's into that stuff.
Oh, she's totally into it. Yeah. And then she now has been trying, like, kids love making clothes that define how they feel, right?
Yeah.
Which is why you feel like a kid still doing this.
Yeah.
And she's got her own store on Depop and is tie-dyeing vintage clothes and is selling clothes, and
awesome.
She loves it. Yeah.
I need the link. You need to drop
All right,
the
I'll
link.
send it to you.
Okay. It is like, it's a fascinating time. 10 years ago, let's say around the 2010 mark, there was a lot of discussion around, streetwear had sold out at that point and gone commercial because brands like ours were going more mass and wide scale. And then there was like a new generation of streetwear brands that came in to kind of resist and challenge what our generation had done. Now all of a sudden we were kind of antiquated and sell out, and so every 4 or 5 years this happens again. Another set of kids comes in who are 16 to 20 years old. They start new brands. Everyone looks at it differently. Right now there's this like really strong movement, especially welled around BLM, of a lot of Black-owned streetwear brands, which is also like a part of the conversation that has been missing for so long. And so a lot of young Black-owned streetwear brands coming to the mix and contributing and showing what they got too. So like there's always this movement, momentum, and this tension between going too big and too popular, which is kind of the point, right, of building a brand and a business. I always say from the first day that you decide to sell something, you really are selling out because you're not doing it for yourself anymore. You're doing it in exchange for money. So like,
wait, but isn't it Tony Hawk who said, or I forget if it was him or not, but who said, you're not selling out if you're selling?
Yeah, yeah. I think Tony did say that. And Tony's like a great example of someone who he got a lot of heat for, and he continues to do so, right? For a few years, I sat on Tony Hawk's board for the Tony Hawk Foundation, and we used to have this conversation all the time because starting in the 90s, he was the Bagel Bites guy and the Butterfinger, or he was always like backing some corporate sponsor. And especially in the 90s when skateboarding was still so core. I mean, it still is to this day. Like, it still has such a core audience. And so for Tony, who was the most notable skateboarder of our generation, to come around and to constantly be endorsing sponsors, corporations, and then making a lot of money against it was always like, that was always just like a hot discussion point,
But and it was a hot discussion point, and this is where your philosophy kind of merged with your business model, because I think by you feeling, hey, this is, going back to that initial feeling of like, hey, you have to ride the skateboard to carry it. You have to have heard the music to wear the shirt. You didn't want to mass produce and mass sell your clothes initially. This was an argument within your company. And
it was, yeah.
How do you resolve that? Because you are a business, and businesses kind of expand naturally. Like, but at the same time, you had this great feeling of scarcity that you were creating. You were only selling initially to skate shops. You would go to the clothing conventions or whatever, and have a black tarp over your clothing line so people couldn't see unless. You wouldn't let people in to see your clothes. There you were at the conference or convention, and you wouldn't let people in to see your clothes. Your philosophy translated quite well into this feeling of scarcity, so people would even want your clothes even more.
Yeah, I think that just came from a punk rock ethos of we can't get too big. I hated when my favorite bands would end up on the radio and they would sign a major deal, right? Then they were just dead to me, and it came from so much emotional insecurity of this is my thing and how dare you do that to me? You're my favorite artist and now I have to share you with everybody else. I want it all to myself. I'm just being selfish with it. And so we built the brand the same way. We just didn't want it to get to a point where everybody was wearing it. The entire point of it, the purpose of it was to create clothing that when you wore it at school, that it felt special, that you felt like an individual, that nobody else had it. In large part, we were responding to a generation that had come up off of Gap. In the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this campaign with Gap saying everybody's in khakis. I don't know if you remember those commercials. They would do these like kind of swing dancing commercials, and they'd be everybody in khakis, and then the next one would be like everybody in cargos. And I would watch these commercials and say like, no, everybody's not in khakis. Like khakis are disgusting, or cargos, or those types of cargos are gross. Like we're not everybody. I'm not everybody. I'm not a part of that. And I felt the same way when I would go out into some of the more popular clothing stores and seeing a lot of the clothes that, everyone's wearing this now, especially Von Dutch. Christian Audigier, the designer at the time, he had a brand called Von Dutch. Ed Hardy, he was making these mesh trucker caps that Paris Hilton was wearing, and everyone was wearing it. And I just thought it looked bad. I just thought it was bad fashion. And the idea that everyone was just willingly going along with all this, not questioning whether this looked good or not, whether that hat frames the face well or whether it even makes sense, the materials about it. We're only doing it because of trend and celebrity association. It really irked me. And so the brand was kind of founded on a lot of these ideals and principles of, let's give you something that comes from a really genuine, authentic place, a person that you recognize and that who's me. Like I'll be completely transparent about everything that we're doing. Every design that we make has a reason, a purpose, a story. Like there's literally a concept and story behind everything that we do. And so in a lot of ways, the brand almost became like a storytelling of my life. Everything that I was discovering and I was enjoying, I would share with the audience. I was almost taking their hand and walking them through, like the process.
Give me an example, because you mentioned this in the book that even these initial shirts you were making had a story behind it as opposed to many other brands. What's an example of a story behind a shirt? Like what would that be? What would that look like?
I mean, you can pretty much pull any shirt. So our most iconic design is this cartoon Bomb. It's our mascot. Yeah. His name is Adam Bomb. And what he represents, well, number one, he was inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. So much of our framework was centered around 80s and 90s pop culture growing up in America. And Saturday morning cartoons were a thing. Looney Tunes, Wile E. Coyote, and the Roadrunner with the cartoon Bomb. But I also like the bomb because it was a metaphor for the brand. It actually never explodes if you look at it. And so I wanted to kind of design the brand in the same sense of it is just bubbling under the surface. It's right about to get there, but we'll never let it explode. I don't want it going everywhere. Right, so there's like a story behind that. We had an early shirt called Self-Offense, which was, it's a derogatory term now, but in the 50s or 60s, they would make these guns. They were called Polish pistols, and the cannon was like basically pointed right back at you. And so I designed like a modern, it was more of like a police gun drawn like that. And there was just many interpretations you could have. Maybe it was like the cops killing themselves, or maybe it was a statement about gun control. The more guns we're putting out there, that we're harming more people than we're actually helping or defending. And so just everything, t-shirts especially, are conversation pieces, right? And that was really the spiritual center of what this brand was supposed to be about, was just to bring people together, right? Connecting, community. And the best, easiest way to do that from a fashion perspective is to have some kind of statement, a design, an interesting take on a t-shirt for someone to latch onto and say, hey, what's that about? Or can I talk to you about your shirt? And just get a conversation going. So that's what it was all about from the very beginning. I just want to get the conversation going. I want people to talk. I want people to like share ideas. You know, even if they have opposing ideas, I want them to talk and exchange. And that's where our community stemmed from, was a lot of like really crazy, weird looking graphics. We had one that was a parody of Super Friends, the 1970s cartoon with all the DC superheroes. I changed it to say bitter enemies, and it was like all of them beating each other up. And so on the surface, it's just like a really cool parody streetwear t-shirt. But when you actually look at it, you're like, well, why are they all fighting? And I'm like, well, a lot of times, you know, people who are supposed to be your best friends are the ones that you actually end up beefing with the most. Especially like in an industry like ours, like it can turn that quickly. And so just talking about like that kind of stuff, you know, so everything had a reason. It wasn't just designing just because. We never designed just because. Even the color of our t-shirts, half of them are black because those are themed around the 80s and a lot of the subcultures of the 80s, from the punk scene to the Sunset Strip metal, hair metal scene to NWA and gangster rap. You know, and then the other half of our clothes are thematically arranged around bright colors and festive colors, like what I have around me. And that comes from the 90s rave scene and independent skate apparel from the 90s. And so everything had to have a reason and a purpose. And again, it's all exhausting, but it all makes sense. You know, I just want everything to make sense and have a reason.
And not to be like, you know, throwing out the business maxims, but this makes sense from a business perspective as well. And every product's got to have a story. You look at like the difference between Steve Jobs and the iPhone and prior MP4 players, or even prior smartphones, the beginnings of smartphones. They didn't have stories around them, and Steve Jobs built this whole story around the iPhone and the design of it and the functionality of it and so on. And I think that's proven to be very powerful in business. So whether through business sense or stumbling into it from the subculture that created all this and created your aesthetic, it was the right decision from a business point of view. And so I was curious then, how did you deal, and you talk about this in the book, but at what point to really grow, you have to say, okay, we're going to mass market. We can't just limit ourselves to the skate culture stores. And just before that, also you were so passionate about this culture that you were designing for and this community that you were designing for, that comes through in the clothes. So what I think ends up happening is it's almost like you're bottling the culture up for all the kids who want to be rebellious or who want to, be different, and they don't have an outlet for that in their town or whatever. So it almost kind of becomes this self-defeating cycle. They get your clothes, but then they're all wearing it, which defeats the purpose. Yeah. But it's still, but it's still coming out of your passion for this culture, and they're appreciating it. So it's a tricky thing.
It is a really tricky thing. It's a delicate balance that I don't think I've ever been able to master and navigate well. And I don't think I ever will. So I think I'm always in the pursuit of this idea that I can be and maintain this idea of being underground and core and being intimate with our audience, but at the same time being able to reach enough of them, right? So like, where is that happy medium? And one way that we think we've been able to hit it is when we do offerings, we call them drops once a week. Every Thursday, there's like a new drop on our website. Some of that product is still extremely limited for our audience. Like there'll be like 100 pieces, or I'll just personally hand make things. Like I'll, throughout the course of the pandemic, I screen printed some sweats myself, or I did a bleaching process. I made a whole Instagram stories about it where I set up 100 pairs of sweats and I was painting them with bleach. And so these are things that I can guarantee you that nobody else in your community are going to have if you have a chance to get it. It's a bummer because our audience is really quite big now. And so if I make 100 of something, it'll sell out immediately. So you just have to be really fast on it. So if you do miss out on that, there are takedowns that are more mass marketed, more mainstream design that anyone can get, that we make them unlimited. So there are just segments now within the collection where some things are meant to be just really small, and if you want to feel special, or if you just don't want to deal with the hassle of waiting in line or having to, compete against everyone else to grab something, like we have some more readily available product as well. But I think that is something that tension will always exist for a brand like ours. To many of our customers, we are, or not, or non-customers, we are like the archetype of the sellout streetwear brand, right? Like there are kids who think that we killed streetwear in a lot of ways. So they made it so widely known and accessible, the whole, making it transparent, writing a book about it, writing a blog about it every day for 10 years, and letting so many people into this secret club really ruined it. And then you have the other half of our, the other segment of the population of streetwear kids who are like, look, because he opened it up, I was able to discover a lot of my favorite brands. The Hundreds was the gateway brand for me to understand what Supreme was, or Off-White, know who Virgil Abloh was, get into Nikes and reselling. And many kids grow up to become entrepreneurs themselves. They don't necessarily build streetwear brands, but I've had like restaurant owners and app developers and all kinds of people coming to me saying like, I grew up wearing your brand because of everything you talked about in your blog about how to build a business and branding and your thought process on design and all that ideology. I was able to now do this with my life, and they've developed careers out of it. And so, it's a give and take. I totally understand the frustration, but once I write about this in the book too, but I think I lived my life so long being this underdog. I'm a middle child. I'm an Asian American person growing up in a community where there just weren't a lot of Asians. So there were so many things that I had thought were stacked up against me, and I kind of built and designed the brand to be coming from that perspective always of like, we're the underdog, we're the underdog, we're the underdog, which got us to a point. But then you have to realize at what level do you start fighting like a champion? And that was the transition that I think happened within the last 5-6 years in this company, to where we really owned the fact that we are really not the underdogs, even though that is our attitude with a lot of the way that we approach things in life, in our business, in our work. But at the end of the day, when people look at our brand now, and even though we've only been around 17 years, that is a heritage brand in the streetwear space. I say it's like your 300 years in streetwear years at that point, because brands just don't last that long.
Do you think you need an underdog to have something to fight for? Is that like a hard adjustment?
Yeah, because, well, for me, so much of how I've always viewed the world was to be fighting against the authority in the mainstream. And obviously this is all coming from a lot of issues, deep-seated issues and undealt with issues I had with my parents and with my father growing up, right? And so everything was always just about getting one up on the man, fighting back, resisting. And then when you get to a point in your career where you look around and you're like, what? Oh, hold on, now I'm the problem, right? I'm defining what the trends are, and I am now the leader in my business, or now in the marketplace, everyone's looking to me like, oh, you're one of the guys who founded this, and you're leading the way. And I'm like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of responsibility there. I have a duty to my audience. I have a duty to this business, to not treat it like, oh, I'm just like this pathetic little guy who's like trying to get one up on everyone. It's like, and my customers now, the kids who are supporting this brand every day, those are the ones, they're looking to me like, we're going to put you out of business one day. And I tell them that all the time. One of the questions I get asked from a lot of budding entrepreneurs and streetwear designers is, they say, how do I win the respect of my peers? Or how do I win the respect of the elders or the pioneers? I just want the respect of brands like you guys. And I always say, you shouldn't be trying to earn our respect. You should be doing everything you can to piss us off every day. Like, that is your role as a young person, as a new brand, as a fresh face in the scene, is to constantly put me on my toes, make me just hate the day that I ever inspired you. You should be trying to put me out of business.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. You have this great line where you say you can't crowdsource validation. once you leave it up to your customers and your audience, and I think this is true not for just for business, but for any art form at all, whether it's art, writing, film, comedy, anything, you can't just rely on, oh, my audience liked this before, so that means they only like me because I do this, so I better keep feeding them.
Right.
Because they're not as loyal as you think.
No.
To you. They're loyal maybe to an idea,
Right.
but they're going to grow past that idea at some point, as should the artist.
Right. People aren't dumb, and kids aren't dumb. As much as many businesses that I know, a lot of other brands, they may treat their customer base as, oh, they're teenagers and they don't know anything, they're just following a trend. They're really not. Like, they're very much aware. And so I don't try to talk down to them. I don't try to placate them. Even the way that I write in the book, it's not necessarily like elementary. Like, I try to use, complicated language when I express a lot of my ideas. And sometimes people say, oh, you're kind of like talking in a way where it sounds really pretentious in your Instagram captions. And I'm like, I just don't treat my audience like they're dumb. I think that they know a lot better. They don't want to be treated like, they're just sheep. And I want them to have a brain, like I treat them like they have a brain. And I do the same with our design offerings. It's really easy to fall into traps with trends where something's working and we're like, let's just pump the shit out of that and make a lot of money because we can, or this is happening in the marketplace, so we're going to go with that. From a business point of view, sometimes you have to make some of those decisions just to cover your rent, get your overhead situated so I can pay my staff. But we don't stick to trends for too long, because at a certain point I'm like, they know I'm pandering to them. Like, I don't want to pander. I want to challenge them. I want to give them something where they're like, oh, that's ugly, I'm not really into it. And then have them look at design and product in a new way, so that in a year from now, they're like, oh, I get what he was trying to do. He was ahead of the curve. That kind of like pushed me to think differently. I think that is our responsibility as designers and as business owners. Is like, we should be challenging people to be better, not just satiating them with sugar and candy all day.
I think, though, like you point out in the book, there's always this tendency later on that you start being afraid, oh my gosh, did I do my best work like 15 years ago or 10 years ago? And the audience, they're not going to want what I have to say next. They wanted this old kind of, hardcore sort of outlook on things, on clothes, on whatever. And I think every writer deals with that. I think it's the graveyard of art is when you succumb to the customer's needs over your own, the fans' needs over your own. But then there's a give and take, because you still have to make clothes that work, you still have to make clothes that they're going to enjoy, that somebody's going to enjoy. Yes. And because you don't want to go out of business just doing, you don't want to go totally radical and do something just because you want to do it. You're in business too.
Yeah, I have to consider them always, right? So that's another question I often get asked about. Where do you draw the line between designing for yourself and designing for other people? I do have to consider the audience all the time. This brand is not just mine, all right? And when I talk about the brand being this living community, I mean it. Like, it's sure, I'm one of the owners of this company in terms of like the money that comes in, but in terms of who has a ownership feeling of the entire brand, they grew up with it, they feel like their voice actually matters, and there's a democratic process into how we make things. That's a really real thing with our brand. I don't want it to be just, this is everything from my point of view, what I want to do. Because if I wanted to do that, we can do those. Those are called art projects. Those are called garage projects that you do within the confines of your home or your basement. And I have those too. I have ghost brands that I've developed, that I have folders of these things on my laptop that I designed just for fun. They're for nobody else to see. I have poetry that I've written, there's essays that I've written that are for nobody, right? Journaling entries. They're for nobody. They just live in locked folders on my computer desktop. And those are for me. Like, I do that and I really enjoy doing it. Sometimes I'll spend weeks doing them. I'm like, I don't need anybody to see this. But this project is something that I share with everybody. People get my logo tattooed on them, right? I talk about in the book, Travis Scott, YG, they have our atom bomb icon tattooed on their arms. So it means as much to them as it means to me. It encapsulates chapters of people's lives. So it's not just a dictatorship of, I want to do whatever I want to do. No, I have to consider other points of view.
But it was interesting what you visited Seoul a few years ago in South Korea, and you hang out with your slightly bigger contemporary, Chan Ho, I think his name is, and he tells you that this means you can actually do more of what you want to do because now you have a bigger business. And I was trying to understand exactly what he meant there. Like I'm understanding a little more just seeing how you're operating now.
Yeah, I think what we were addressing at that point, I was having a really hard time at that point in my career, knowing if I was staying authentic and true to myself and the brand and what I initially got into this for. Was at that point, was I just doing it for money? You know, work had become really difficult. We were between trends. Our brand was just transitioning from being this small, unknown underdog to now we're mainstream to now like, what are you? You know, you just kind of exist and you're not really cutting edge anymore, and there's something sexier. You're like a junior in high school now, you know? You're not like the respected senior. You're not like the cool new kid on the block. It's just like, who are you? What is this brand? And I was in Korea and spending time with Chan-ho. He owns a brand called Lifeful. And I asked him the same question. I said, can you be a big brand? Like the bigger you get, can you stay authentic? Which from my point of view was almost near impossible. I was just like, that can't be. Like the bigger you are, it would be more detached, more removed from yourself and the essence of who you are and like why you started this to begin with. And he was like, I don't understand your question, because the bigger I get, the bigger the company gets, the more of myself is invested in it than ever. And I was like, oh yeah, like I didn't think about it from that point of view, from that perspective of this has become your life. Like I turned 40 this year. I started this brand when I was 23. So within the next few years, there's gonna be a point where the hundreds is the majority of my life, right? So like that is the biography of who Bobby is you just have to look at what's transpired within the last 2 decades of this company. Like that is me.
And so do you feel now with each product that it still has to, like, do you look at it and say, okay, there's me in this. There's enough me in this, I can release it.
Yeah,
it's not just like a t-shirt with a swoosh on it or not putting Nike down, but it's not just a logo.
Yeah, everything I sign off on, and there is a fingerprint, something about me that carries and resonates within everything that we offer in the collection. I can point to it all, you know, like everything. Like this hat I'm wearing is a collaboration with 2 of the guys who work for us. Actually, they have a record label called Blondie Beach Records, Black-owned record label, and the city is really popular. And so I said, let's, you know, we all agreed, let's do a collaboration together. But even like in the color choices of going from like a darker green to this contrasted like pastel yellow here on the side, this pastel pink on the side, those are color choices that came from my mom. Like a lot of the color combinations that I am inspired by and that you see reflected in the clothing were instilled from my mom, like when I was growing up, and she was kind of teaching me how to make a lot of art and the way that she would color things. And so there's a piece of me in everything, right? And it's not just me, it's everyone who works within the building, within the staff. They're all involved. You can see how different chapters of the hundreds are laid out depending on who was working there at the time. You know, there's like this baseline that is, you know, the connective tissue is like me and my partner, Ben. You can see that through everything. But the upper layers of it, there are periods where we look more menswear and trad. And then there were periods where we just got really loud and garish. And you can connect those with whoever was involved in that time who was driving a lot of the design opinion. And so I think it's not just my story, it's everyone's story.
No, I think that's great because I think everybody at heart is an artist, and to be able to infuse the things you do, whether it's an action, an activity, or an object you create, or a relationship you have, to infuse that with your philosophy, your take on things, your story, I think that's really valuable, and it's something that we often forget in our society. And I know for myself, I've been a writer for a long time, and those periods where I've wrestled with feeding the audience versus continuing my own journey, those have been very difficult times. Like it's a hurdle you have to go through as an artist. And it's not necessarily an interesting story to talk about that hurdle, but it's still a hurdle that you have to go through.
Yeah.
But
I sorry to just throw in one last thought on that subject. One of the common things I talk about in the book is how my approach to design is must contain an opinion, right? Like all design has an opinion. Like that's your personal fingerprint, and that's what makes it special. Because look, at the end of the day, especially in streetwear, no design is original. Like we come from a world of parody and reappropriation over and over and over again. So anything that's cool and it's done, it's been done. And so what makes it unique is that you did it and your personal opinion on it changed it, forever. And that's what I think people want from us as designers, more than even just the design or the art, is they want our opinion. They want our human touch, our perspective, our point of view. They want to understand that, whether or not they even agree with it, right? So I talk about this a lot, even within the realm of politics. I tell people all the time, like if they're starting a brand, being a business owner, I'm like, be transparent and communicative and honest with where you stand on things, whether or not you think people are going to agree. It's not about that, right? Like so many of my followers have completely opposing politics. So I sit in the direct messages and I debate and we discuss, and they don't agree with a lot of the things that I say, but what they always come out with is like, thank you for just being honest and telling me how you really feel about things, regardless of what's popular or trendy, or regardless of what's going to sell or you're going to be able to make money against. I can just tell that you're genuine about it, because I also change my mind all the time when it comes to political opinions, right? And people can see that throughout the course of my career, where they're like, oh, you're starting to sound like you're more receptive to the gun conversation. And I'm like, well, yeah, like again, with new information, I have new opinions. Like my opinions, we're always in the pursuit and process of getting somewhere. Like, don't hold me to what I'm saying right now. Like this is a journey. Like I'm 40 years old, I'm not 20 anymore. A lot of things I believed in at 20, I don't believe in that anymore. But it was important that I believed in 20 in order for me to do what I did at 20, to the world.
Yeah, like I remember when I was 20, just having so many like angry fights with my dad about, I don't know, Iran-Contra or whatever, like something just stupid. And now it's really like, I think it's more about asking questions than having answers, because you see on Twitter, obviously nobody has answers. And, and discourse is important. Like you need to be able to work with people and to have pluralism, to have many voices to create a society. And hopefully we don't become too polarized in this process. But so now though, like, let's say kids are out there, what is youth culture right now?
Oh yeah, that's
like
such an
what are you
interesting
seeing?
question. I think if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I was very jaded and fatigued by everything. I believed that it didn't exist anymore, like the underground didn't exist. I'm like, how can subculture exist in the world of the internet where everything's accessible and you can learn about everything overnight? But there is still such viable, strong, like vibrant subculture and underground that exists, that just the fact that you wonder, oh, is it out there, is like, that's exactly the point. Like it's invisible to people our age. And I discover things all the time where I'm like, wait, who's doing what in the back of which coffee shop? And then I'll show up and, they're like having like a little performance or something's going on, but it's happening constantly with these kids. And a lot of it's happening off the grid, even if it's happening online, you're only getting like mysterious little snippets of it. But I think now what's happening with a lot of youth culture, it is interwoven with capitalism, with entrepreneurialism. It's done in a way where let's make money, even if it's to move money into different directions, from activist causes, or I just want to push my money towards a certain individual. But they've figured out that part of the puzzle, where it's not just art for art's sake, but like, let's make art and make money against it and like use those together, for better and for worse. And so this generation is just so savvy in terms of how they're operating business and developing brands in a way where it's second nature to them. From the moment that they set up a TikTok profile, they are architecting the marketing around it. They are essentially establishing a brand, right? So
which is not a bad thing necessarily. No. Like it's removing power from the corporate giants to the individual.
Oh yeah, like we're a testament to that. We're just a very early testament of that. Of a brand like ours may not have been able to exist if it was born 10 years prior. Because we just were set up so differently. But we sold online, we went direct. we couldn't take out advertising in magazines. In the early 2000s, as ad space was like $10,000 a page, and so we were like, we can't advertise. How are people going to know about us? Well, we have the internet. It's free. Let's blanket the internet. Let's take advantage of all these free opportunities to get our name out there. And so we just manipulated the internet through blog, through early social to get our name out there. And that's how we existed. Otherwise, I don't think we would have ever been able to enter a lot of these spaces. People would have never known we'd existed. So I don't know. Now this generation of kids that are growing up, they are just so knowledgeable and so much more deft at understanding a lot of this than I ever am. They just come into setting an Instagram profile or a TikTok profile with I already know how to build merchandise against it. Everyone is a brand from the moment they set up their bio and they have a link tree or they have some kind of Shopify card against it, and they're making $100,000 overnight, and taking all that money away from Mervyn's and Robinson's May and everyone's just now it's going into just kids.
Well, if you were 19 years old right now, what would you do? How would you be thinking?
I feel like I run this exercise every day. Because I have to, because my competitors are 19, my customers are 19. Yeah. And so I'm constantly trying to look at, and we are partners in other brands too that are run by much younger people. They're much younger brands. And so I am looking at things in their way. First of all, when we started, it was you had to sell to stores, and so that is not in the conversation much anymore. And then there was a generation that was, to be a legitimate brand, you have to have your own store, an actual brick and mortar flagship store. And now that's not a part. There was a point in time where we had 4 stores like that across the country, 2 here in LA, San Francisco, and New York. Paying exorbitant $20,000 a month in Soho to run the hundreds in New York for 5 or 6 years. And we don't really need to have that conversation anymore, especially if a city like New York is going to be hurting for a little bit if it does. So that, even the conversation of how do we approach retail and selling? How do we make our brand experiential and feel a certain way without you actually ever even having to come into contact with it? How do we communicate as humans behind this brand and reach our customer, another human on the other side? How can we do it in a way that feels really logical and organic? The easy answer today, in this moment right now on this Monday, is oh, you set up a Twitch, right? You got to set up a Twitch channel, and are you on whatever the next big app is? Are you doing the new Reels on Instagram? And that's the easy answer. We all know that we have all the access to the technology and the tools. There's always going to be different technology. They're tools, right? We just use them to facilitate the communication. But how are we looking at developing our brand and business in a way that is contrary or different or distinct from what everybody else is doing? Speaking in a way that resonates in a louder way that does, everyone's speaking this language, we're going to speak in this language now. And then how do we build communities in a way that no one has ever really thought to do before, and also in a way that is really helpful to what people need right now, right? So when we were starting our company, we knew that there was this really cool scene happening in LA, but the lens was focused on Tokyo and New York at that time in the early 2000s around streetwear, and LA was kind of corny. It was reality shows and just bad bedazzled hats and stuff like that. And so we were we need to be helpful in a way. How can we put the emphasis on really cool LA things that are happening? Concentrating on our town and the people around us. So we started just writing stories about each person that we're hanging out with. This is Abram. He's an artist. He's doing this right now. And just one person at a time. I want you to meet my friend Flynn. He's a rapper. He's coming up. A lot of those people ended up turning into really big deals, and they will always point back to the Hundreds was the one who put me on first. And I can say that for a lot of cool big celebrities now, but that helped us in the end just to be helpful from the beginning, right? The rising tide lifts all boats thing, I believe that wholeheartedly, just business wide, right? Our Fairfax streetwear district in Los Angeles happened because we were all interested in promoting each other, right? So that's on my Instagram stories this week, and I dedicated the entire thing to supporting another brand called Chinatown Market, which is also very popular, new, much cooler than the Hundreds right now. And I was just telling them, this is what they have going on. Whenever I do that, people are like, why are you doing, this is a competitor, they're taking, and I'm like, we are so small. There are somewhere between 6 and 8 billion people in the world. right? Like I'm going to hit 12,000 people with this. We're so minuscule and we're just a non-issue, non-threat, right? Like we need all of us to build up for everyone to look at us together. Like there's just so much opportunity.
I think that's really important. I think also it kind of signals to everybody that you're abundant in your ideas, that creativity is a well that doesn't run dry. And so you can build up other creatives without sacrifice. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, oh, I'm saying he's creative, so I can't be creative anymore. Like I always say, like Google, if you go to Google and say, Google, tell me about skateboards, Google's going to say, hey, James, I don't know anything at all about skateboards, but here's 10 websites you should go to. And by the way, all websites are competitive with each other because you're either looking at one website or you're looking at us. But we want you to go as fast as possible to these other websites and knock yourself out. And hey, if you like us, come back.
Yeah.
And that's the whole Google approach, is to send people away as quick as possible, to recommend other websites as quickly as possible.
It's so true.
They measure their success by how fast you get off their website.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought about it that way, but I do love that word, the choice of word that you use in terms of being abundant with ideas. And I'm not precious with my ideas, and I think I just acknowledge that I don't own many of the ideas, even if I feel like they were conjured up in my head. I do know they're inspired and within the context of my experiences, it came from somewhere, but I don't own that idea. And I know that at the same time, I'm bigger than one idea or 5 ideas or 10 ideas. Like if anyone's going to take something from me or steal from me, that's okay. Like you need it more than I need it. Like I have another one,
And so what's next now? Like, if someone says, hey, here's $1 trillion, will you sell your company? You'll probably do it. But like, what do you want to do?
Well, right now, we're concentrating on figuring out how this brand is going to navigate and sustain over the next year, like many small businesses are. I'm trying to figure out a way to take care of my staff and make the experience like just whole and interesting and exciting for them, because we're such a tight-knit business. The way that we do things with our company is that we're all friends and family here, and the fact that we are separated and many of us are working from home has been a little bit difficult to maintain a lot of those relationships. So figuring that part out is probably always top of mind. And then just outside of the hundreds world, just writing more. I'm working on this next book. I want to write more fiction. There's some like Hollywood stuff at play that has kind of transpired in the wake of the memoir, This Is Not a T-Shirt. And so I want to write. I think I've always kind of romanticized this idea at the end of my life, I'm going to be in a cottage somewhere writing books and essays and poems. And like, that's what I get off on more than anything else. And surfing as much as I can.
Do you surf more or you skateboard more?
I surf way more now. I'm old. It hurts less when I fall.
I wish I could just go back in time and be a kid just to say I was a skateboarder. Like, I just never did it as a kid. It wasn't in my suburb, skateboards. Nobody did it.
Yeah, no one really did it. So skateboarding was really big in the 80s. And then after like Tony Hawk, Christian Asoy, the Alva thing, like it kind of dipped in the early 90s. And that's when I found it. And I wasn't actually ever really good at skating. Like I only have a few tricks under my belt. I'm just not like, I don't have great balance. Like I just wasn't really, I'm not an athletic person really much at all. And so, but I was drawn to it because it was the thing that was counted out and was like the minority subculture. So it's like, whoa, you still skateboard? Just so I could point my finger back at them and be like, you'll see one day it's gonna come back and it'll be bigger than ever. And then when everyone discovered skateboarding like 5 or 6 years later, and then there was X Games and all this stuff, I was just like, oh, I told you, like that whole thing of like, I'm the underdog and I know better than everybody else. But
yeah, Tony Hawk waited it out. He was just like making skateboards during that whole period.
He's
for
so
no
smart.
money. And
also credit to his sister Pat and to Steve, his brother. Like it's really like they're the masterminds of the entire thing too. So like you've had Tony on the show before. I'm assuming. Yeah. So like
he's a great guy.
Yeah, I think I saw that. So they're really smart. They're really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as are you, Bobby Hundreds. This is not a t-shirt by Bobby Hundreds. This was I really enjoyed reading this. Like you're going in and out of time. The story structure is great. Like it's a really good read about a business, about a subculture. And again, it's not like reading a business story. Like I really enjoy stories of subcultures. Like I think there's something magical about subcultures, and I've always found myself attracted to them. And to this day, and I think I don't grow old because of that. Like I'm always, what's the next thing I could be excited about, and then I give up everything for that thing.
Yeah.
So
I'm very lucky to be able to live and work in this space every single day of my life.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, James.
The show and the hundreds.com. People could buy your clothes. I don't know. Oh, I was going to ask you one other thing. It's just a dumb thing, but the thing about clothing is that you have to work within a solid structure. Like a shirt has 2 sleeves, a jacket has 2 sleeves, pants have 2 leg pants. And how do you innovate in structure as well as design? I know this is just a random question out of nowhere.
It's not a random question. I think that's the challenge, right? I think that's where it gets really interesting and innovative, because you have these really set guidelines. You have boundaries around what you can do, and like what can you, like you think that you're limited to that, but there's actually so much space from within that to innovate and change and create something new. And even in the fit of, let's say, a pair of pants, right? There's so many ways to design the pants, just from little nominal incremental changes. A dart, that goes down the back pocket, or a welt pocket versus like a fuller cargo pocket. Like that changes the way that your bottom looks and sits, So yes, like the idea of pants, like 2 leg openings, sure. But then once you mix up the materials, like you can have a denim, and within the denim, like there's different types of denim, different weights and ounces, and all of that affects the structure of how you look and how you feel, right? Like right now, the discussion largely is around a lot of comfortable loungewear, sportswear, at-home sweats, right? Like I think the New York Times Magazine had a cover story on this last week about, we're sweatpants nation now, where it's all about sweats.
I even disagree with that. Not that I'm a fashion expert, as you could see, but since April, I've worn nothing but pajamas. So I've been on airplanes, I've been in restaurants, I've been out, I've been at Black Lives Matter protests, and I just wear pajamas. Because why not? It's by definition the most comfortable clothes. We can sleep in them.
Yeah.
What else does anybody need? And then they feel good. They usually look good.
Yeah.
So
that's always been my thing, is as long as you feel good in them, then you're your confident and most stylish self. Like you're gonna look the best if you feel the best. Like some people need a suit to feel their best. Like they don't feel comfortable in pajamas. Like they feel complete when they're wearing like a 3-piece bespoke suit. That's not me. I feel complete when I dress like this. I was in law school. There was a period of time where I would wear a suit to work every day, and you could look at, like, even if you didn't know who I was, you'd look at me and be like, that guy just looks uncomfortable in his suit, or he looks like he's wearing his dad's suit, which lawyers would tell me all the time, like, dude, you just don't look good. And I'm like, but it's an expensive suit and everything is trimmed right. But I'm like, I just don't, it's like there's a vibrance or something around it that just feels off. But me, I'm wearing Dickie pants, which I've been wearing since I was 12 years old, like Nike shoes that I've been wearing for 20 years, like a New Era hat that I've been wearing forever. Like this is me. Like I am my 100% optimal self, dressed like this every day. This is how fashion works.
Excellent. Thank you, Bobby Hundreds, for coming on the show.
Thanks, James.
The best holiday ever is officially underway at Bloomingdale's, where you'll discover the most exciting and unique gifts around. The kind of presents that you can't wait to give because they're just that good. So no matter whom you're shopping for, even your sister who has practically everything, you'll find hundreds of picks that deliver on the promise of the best holiday ever right now at Bloomingdale's.